Hey everybody, Tom from TMB Tech. Today's video is going to be about the single biggest problem with the new Sony A7c. So let's get to it. All right, the Sony A7c. What's the biggest problem with it in my opinion? So first, a couple caveats. I don't have a Sony A7c. I have looked at it only online just like the rest of you. But what I can tell by looking online, it's pretty obvious that this problem exists. And that's what I'm going to talk about today. So let's talk about the problem. The problem is a criticism that primarily pertains to people who shoot in manual mode. You know, the thing is, if you don't shoot in manual mode, almost any camera will work for you. It's really not a problem. I'm amazed at the guys who buy a Fujifilm camera, which was renowned for its fantastic ergonomics and controls. It's got all these controls. You have direct physical access to the exposure triangle, shutter speed, aperture, ISO. You can look at the camera. It doesn't even have to be powered up, and you can tell it's set up. That, to me, as a manual shooter, is fantastic. If it wasn't for another problem I found with Fuji cameras that I will put here, I'd be shooting Fujifilm right now. But I'm not. So I'm shooting Sony because Sony knows how to create an effective auto exposure algorithm. But anyway, if you're not going to shoot manual mode, if you're shooting at aperture priority or shutter priority, what I call the semi-manual or semi-automatic modes, or if you're shooting in full auto, which God forbid, there are times for that, of course, but I'm talking about how you like to shoot if you have the time and if you're going to really try to get creative. I use manual mode whenever I can. Sure, like go into a scene, auto, get the shot, and then play around with manual. But if you're going to shoot in aperture priority, which from what I am told, from what I can tell, most people shoot in, then who cares? You only need one dial. So anyway, so this criticism primarily applies to when you're trying to shoot in manual mode. Now, let's get to it. So, problem number one. There aren't any custom buttons, right? I mean, Sony is renowned for being able to allow you to customize the camera and make it your own. I'm holding my, venerable A6000 here because I'm filming you the 6400, because it's so much better at just about everything. But anyway, custom buttons. Even the APC bodies have got, 1, 2. Well, all these buttons can be customized, but a lot of them you kind of still want, but they can be customized to your liking. The A7c has very, very few dedicated custom buttons. I think it has one. And the rest of the buttons, I am assuming, can be customized, but I haven't really tested that. But it's sorely lacking in the custom button department. That's problem number one. Problem number two, no front dial. People talk about it doesn't have a front dial. And let me get this out of the way right away, is that more dedicated physical controls are in general better. I mean, Fujifilm cameras are the leader in this area, in my opinion, and Sony's not, especially with their APS-C bodies. But curiously, in their higher price full-frame bodies, they have more controls. Anyway, so there's no front dial in any of these cameras ever since the NEX7, which is the last APS-C body, I believe, to have two dials that are customizable. I'll put a link to the other video here that I talk about that problem. After that, which was a long time ago, Sony has opted for only having one. Let me just go to my side camera here. Sony has one customizable dial on its APS-C bodies, and that allows you to have direct physical access and control while shooting for one value of the exposure triangle. And if you're shooting in aperture priority mode, that's probably okay. Yes, you can't easily adjust ISO, and you have to go to that stupid wheel on the back, which I really, really hate. But there is a dedicated button on that D-pad for ISO. It's marked ISO. It's not that hard. It's not that bad. So you go to that button here and you just hit ISO and you can select it. You go to that button here, marked ISO, you click it, and it brings up the ISO control, and you can select what you want. That's not bad, because now if you're constantly changing ISO, then you might have a different opinion than I do. But to me, I go into a scene, I go, okay, this scene and this type of subject, I'm going to try to shoot ISO 100. Or lots of movement, lots of crazy stuff, I'll put it on my auto ISO, right? But I'm not typically changing ISO every shot, whereas when you're in manual mode, you typically shoot, you're going to be changing your shutter speed and your aperture, perhaps, every few shots. So you really want immediate control of that. So the fact that there's no front dial really means there are not two customizable control dials on the body. That's the real complaint. You want two. You don't want one, you want two. Now, a lot of people say, hey, use the wheel. The wheel's customizable. There's the wheel right there. You can do whatever you want. Well, you know what? I've said that before in a video. I'll put it up here. That sucks. Bad, bad, bad. It really sucks. It makes you move your thumb out of the way, and while you're shooting, and you got to like move it around there. And there's a D-pad here. So you could, if you push down any of these buttons, I have this thing on. If you push down on any of these buttons, you're going to actually change the functionality. What's going on here? You're going to bring up ISO, or you might, I just changed my ISO. You have to press the shutter button to get out of that menu, and you may not even know you're in it. So that's a problem. So it just sucks. It really blows. It's okay for infrequent settings. In my opinion, it's okay for ISO if I have to do it, but not for shutter speed and aperture at any time. I don't think it's good for that. So you need two customizable control dials up on top somewhere. One in the front, one in the back, I don't care, but you need two. So the interesting thing about this is that Sony sort of fixed it in later APS-C bodies by coming up with the My Dial functionality. I talked about this briefly in a video I'll put up here. I talked about the My Dial functionality, and it does, for the most part, solve the problem. Now, it's not as good. Let me get this straight. It's not as good as having two customizable control dials, but it's not bad. I'm using my A6000, even though it doesn't have that capability. The A6400 I'm filming on does, and I'll do another video about that in detail, about My Dial and how it works, because nobody seems to talk about this, because quite frankly, most reviewers don't use it or don't understand it, or they don't shoot in manual mode. And they may primarily shoot in aperture priority, which this is a non-issue if that's what you do. Because if you shoot in aperture priority, there's your control dial. So I'll do another video on that later. But to use My Dial briefly, you have to be able to dedicate a custom button to control this function. And then when you dedicate that custom button, you can, by pushing the button, change what this wheel does. Instead of having just do aperture, or just do shutter speed, or just do ISO, you can switch it by hitting a button. And if there's a button like right nearby, like, I don't know, this button here, it makes it pretty simple when you're shooting. Just move your finger from there to there, boom, boom, because you already got your finger on the shutter. So you move it over there, click it, and move. Click, blue. I can do that pretty easily. So the interesting thing is with the APS-C body cameras, the later models, Sony fixed this problem. Short of putting another control dial in, they fixed the problem for most of us. And I'm not sure, but I don't think they did that for the A7C. The A7C, the problem with the A7C is twofold. It has very few customizable buttons, and it only has one customizable control dial that you can see. So that is a big problem with the A7C. The biggest problem is if you're shooting in manual mode in the A7C, you're screwed. But there may be a way out. Since I don't have an A7C, I can't test this. But if Sony there's a couple ways that Sony could have fixed this in the A7C already that I don't know about. One is they should allow you to repurpose that exposure compensation dial that's on there. Because Sony A7c actually has 2 dials, but only one appears to be customizable. Sony A7c has another dial. They got a customizable dial down here somewhere, and then they've got an exposure comp dial, clearly marked on the body. Now, if they have a menu setting that allows you to repurpose that exposure comp dial, let's say when you're in manual mode, because exposure comp means nothing in manual mode. There is no such thing as exposure comp in manual mode. Well, so when you're in manual mode, have that dial do something else. Say, I don't know, shutter speed or aperture, whichever the control dial is not doing. That would be perfect. That would be a firmware setting. Doesn't cost a lot to do that, but will they? So that's one way out of the problem. The second way out of the problem is to basically have the same dial function in the A7c that they already have in the APS-C body cameras, and allow you to, by use of a customizable button, change what that one dial does. It's kind of clunky because there's not that many buttons. And as far as I can tell on the A7c, you don't have a custom button on the top like this. You have a video record button. So you'd have to repurpose that button so that it allowed you to actuate the dial function. Not perfect, especially if you're recording video, then you'd have to have some other way to set that up to record video. I'll show you in another video how I use my 6400 for both video recording and manual shooting, which is, I wouldn't say perfect, but it's great and very usable, and I love it. So short of having a Fujifilm body on my Sony camera, it's the best compromise I've come up with. And way better than A6000 can do. And I don't know, it might be better than A7c can do, because the A7c's problem is it doesn't have very many customizable buttons. So even if it does have the dial function, which I think the A7 bodies do too, if it does have that function, then how do you use it without compromising your other capabilities? That's the problem. There's hope, because hopefully, number one, Sony has provided the capability to repurpose that exposure comp dial, which is useless in manual mode, or they at least allow you to use dial with repurposing that shutter button, because that's the only one that is in a good position for the action. But the bottom line is, the APS-C bodies are not well designed for manual mode due to the lack of 2 customizable dials. But there is a workaround in later models using the dial function. So right now, the A7c appears to be severely crippled because of that lack of a second control dial that other people talk about. There is hope. You might be able to use dial functionality with the video record button. If somebody knows you can do that, let me know. Or you may be able to repurpose that exposure comp dial, which would be ideal, because in manual mode it is useless. That's my take on the A7c's single biggest weakness when it comes to manual shooting. And I hope you like this video. If you do, come on back, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye.